I was raised in Indiana. I was a Mennonite farm girl. Now, we were part of the modern Mennonites, but my grandfather was Amish. I woke up with a vision of Texas. And it was surrounded in flames. And so
Wow.
I had never heard a woman speak until I did it.
Hey, thank you so much for watching and listening. Of course, I want you to subscribe because we have great content, really cool guest interviews, and the jokes. Did you hear about the fire in the circus? There was a circus fire. It was very intense. All right. I have Sue Detweiler with me today. Thank you for hanging out.
I'm so glad to be here.
Totally stoked.
Yeah.
Sue, where were you born and raised?
I was raised in Indiana. I was a Mennonite farm girl. So if you've ever met Mennonite farmers.
Yeah. So you grew up like on a farm?
I did. Now, we were part of the modern Mennonites, but my grandfather was Amish. And so I had never heard a woman speak until I did it.
Wow. So what's the difference between Mennonites and Amish?
There's a lot of difference, but historically it was actually Jacob Ammon that broke off the Mennonite church because the Mennonite church was becoming too worldly. So for example, in that time of war, the Prussian War, the officers wore these great big buttons. Yep. So the Amish do not wear buttons, if you ever notice how their dresses are made. So they did different things to live a simple lifestyle.
And you grew up that way?
I grew up with an entrepreneurial father that had a huge vision and really changed the context of our region. Like when different car things went under, he was the one bringing in people. So he was a builder. He had 6 corporations. At his funeral, I mean, there were senators and there were Amishmen weeping.
Wow.
Because he just was a forward-thinking, entrepreneurial man that always pressed boundaries and expanded things. I loved him dearly.
Yeah, what was your mom like?
Oh, now my mom traveled with your mom 30 years ago into China, and they took some Bibles in there. And it was so exciting. My mom loves God. Like right now, she's probably praying. She's an intercessor. So part of my story is my dad and my mom were going to go to Brazil. And they were set. They had 3 boys. They were finishing seminary, and they were going to be missionaries. And then they got pregnant with me. Well, in those days, my dad made the decision not to go to Brazil. And then my mother was heartbroken. And she had 2 prayers. First, she was like, God, I can't take another boy. Give me a girl. And, because she'd cared for these little boys in a tiny trailer. And then so she asked for a girl, and then she claimed Jeremiah 1. You will be a prophet to the nations. And she claimed that I would fulfill some of the promises of God that she had wanted to go to Brazil. Yeah. And so she finally got to Brazil when we adopted our 2 sons.
Wow.
From Brazil.
That's cool.
I know. Isn't that kind of cool?
Yeah. Was she a good cook?
Oh my goodness. Great cook.
Yeah.
And I grew up cooking, but I do have a fun story because I didn't always like cooking for my brothers, because they would be out farming and I was supposed to have food on the table. And one day I burned the hamburgers and my brother said, and then I'm feeding the cat like cat food at the same time. He's like, the cat eats better than us.
Ooh.
So the next day, there were these, full bowls of cat food on the table. Now, I thought I'd really done it and pulled it over, but really the truth was they chased me down, held me down, and had me eat some.
Ooh.
So I had a pretty rough and tumble upbringing with all of these boys. I think it definitely impacted me, and it actually helped me because beginning ministry 40 years ago, I was always the only woman in the room. And so I think growing up, relating to men just helped me.
Yeah.
Helped me. And my brothers are such champions. And my father was such a good champion for me. I mean, he's the one that, like, when it didn't look like it was even possible to enter into ministry. I mean, it just didn't. But I'd had an encounter with God when I was 16, and I remember sharing that with my father, and he just, like, he believed in me, and he championed me. And I say that because many women that I know haven't had men champions. And it's so meaningful when you have a father that affirms you. And my mother does too. I mean, she's the one that prays. And I came home recently from Kenya, and God had done all these miracles. I mean, it was astonishing. And she runs out and she says this, and she's real funny sometimes. She's like, "You're blowing my mind." And she's like really dramatic. And I'm like, "What do you mean, Mom?" She's like, "I have always believed God that he would use you. I've always prayed for, but you have gone beyond what I've ever thought of or imagined." And I said, "Do you remember how we've been focusing on Ephesians 3:20? That God wants to do far more than you hope for or imagine." And I think sometimes God has dreams for our lives. And he wants us to tap into the beyond.
Yeah.
He wants to tap into what he has in mind for us.
Yeah. So coming back, I'm going to come back to your mom.
Good.
And like her cooking.
Oh,
right?
yes.
Yeah. So what was your favorite thing that she cooked?
Oh my goodness. She cooked every night. So I think roast and potatoes. I mean, that was like a comfort meal. So just think of a whole cow killed and in your freezer. I mean, that's kind of how we grew up. So we grew up with great beef and then these vegetables, and it's just awesome.
And did she make her own bread?
You know what? She didn't, but I did early on.
Yeah.
I did. I ground the wheat and I made homemade bread for my kids.
Right.
Until, I kind of cut out gluten and baking and, just for health reasons. But they grew up with me.
Yeah, that's cool.
Grinding the wheat and making the bread.
So tell me all the different places you've lived.
Well, not really that many. I mean, Indiana, and then we moved. We did youth ministry in Indiana when we first married, or before we got married. And then we moved to Nashville to plant our first church, and we pastored there for like 29 years. And then, I mean, it was such a shift. When you've been somewhere 29 years, you raised your children, they're now adults. But we could just sense that God was like shifting us. Like, you know how it's like, okay, God. And it felt like pulling up roots, actually, because we love Nashville. And you've sown into people's lives, but we kept feeling it. And so we traveled to Virginia. There's a Bible college there, and they offered me a job, traveled out a second time, and God said, no. It was like, no. You know how in your mind you want to say yes to something because it looks like a good opportunity, but in my gut, it was like, no. So there's another church in North Carolina, a large one. It was like 3,000 members, and they asked us to interview. So we went out and saw the beautiful trees of North Carolina, and we got there, and we thought we would go. And again, like late that Sunday afternoon, I just, in the deep of my stomach, I just knew no. And so we're on vacation and I'm doing this thing with God where I'm walking on the beach and I'm like, God, what are you doing? Like, you don't waste people's gifts, you use them. We sense you're shifting us, but what do you want us to do? Um, and also a backstory to this is I kept saying to my husband, honey, why don't we plant a church? You know, you can pastor, you know, I can be a great help. And we'd already planted and pastored one, but he would simply say, those aren't my primary gifts. I'm a better associate. And he would just say that. He's like the most humble man in the world. So we'd had this conversation, and I'm on the beach, and I hear the Lord say, are you willing to take point? And I kind of knew what he meant. Just because we've been a part of the Four Square Church in years, and like one or the other of you needs to be the first person.
Sure.
And so when I heard him say that, I came back to my humble husband, and we both knew what that meant. Yeah, because we'd already planted together as a team.
Right.
But so a couple days later, I woke up with a vision of Texas. And it was surrounded in flames. And it was like Bonanza. Have you ever seen Bonanza?
Yep,
You know?
yep.
And it's just outlining it. And I knew God was like outlining territory. I felt like he was saying it's a new field. It's imperative to go. And that he was going to bring revival. You know, that's something that we'd always prayed for in Nashville as we worked with different churches. And so anyway, we reached out to our Four Square leaders. We didn't know people in Texas, but they did. And so they opened the door and we planted and pastored a church that was the second church that we planted.
Wow.
And so we are in Dallas now. Now, we laid down pastoring a couple years ago. It really, after an encounter with God again,
Nice.
it really surprised me.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it was a huge shift.
Mm.
But do you all know Randy Clark?
Mm-hmm.
So Randy sends his love.
Yeah.
Apostle Guillermo Maldonado
Sure.
sends his love. I didn't
Sure.
know who he was at that point. But Randy had laid his hands on me. He said, electrocute her, Jesus, you know, just a simple prayer. And I had this encounter where God began to remind me of my little girl desire. I was in Belize, Central America before I married my husband for 3 months. And I loved it. And I in fact was begging God, let me stay in the mission field. And God clearly said, go home and marry that man. And it was right. And then again, I remember praying, we were fasting and praying about how to educate our kids, you know. And I turn on Christian television, I'm seeing these healing and miracles. And I'm like, God, what about the nations? And very clear word, lay down your life for your children. And not only will I send you to the nations, but your kids as well. And so I'm in this encounter with God, and he's bringing this back to my mind. You know, remember. And it was a shift, and he was calling us to lay down pastoring, which at that point was really hard. And it didn't make sense to my mind, but now I understand with all the grandchildren that have come, there is no way we could have done both, you know?
Yeah.
And so lay down pastoring and embrace travel, and that he wanted me to go and preach where little girls have never heard the gospel preached. And so that was about 2.5 years ago. And God did this like open doors and favor that has been unbelievable.
Nice.
And both in the state house and in the slums, and preaching where little girls have never preached, in large places and in small places. Mm-hmm. And so it has been so much fun. but definitely a God idea and a surprise.
Yeah, yeah. And just kind of a left field question.
Sure.
What do you like to do to relax?
I love to work out. I mean, that may not sound like relaxing, but like a great day for me would be a really hard workout where I feel really alive. And then like lingering time with Jesus where there's no rush. Maybe a movie with my husband and a date day. And then if you top it off with some grandchildren, because like grandchildren, oh my goodness, they bring so much joy. We have 10. 10. I don't know how many you have. Do you?
0.
Oh, not yet, Isabella.
No, no pressure. No pressure. It's all good. My kids are a little young for that right now.
Oh, they're too young for
right,
that.
so we're not going down
I'm
that
so
rabbit
sorry.
hole.
And my
No
kids
problem.
are so much bigger, and they're all married and good marriages.
It's totally good.
So I have 10, and number 11's on the way.
Wow.
And they're 7 and under.
Yep.
So every family gathering is completely different now, like wild and crazy.
Yeah.
So, but fun, and truthfully, probably some of the most joy in my life is with the grandchildren. Like it's just like laughter and fun.
Nice.
I love it.
Nice. Well, thank you for hanging out. Thank you for watching and listening. Thank you for subscribing. And of course, you want to hit the notification bell right there. Hello. Because we'll keep you posted with new content. Thanks again.